Um, our sponsors for today, who I want to thank, we'll get their thanks in a moment, but I'm going to ask the two candidates to be seated, be comfortable. We have a small enough group, and I apologize to our candidates with regard to the size of our attendance, but I know this is a group that is going to enjoy our discussion this morning. I know that the press and the Conway Daily Sun and others will be publicizing the results of the discussion today, and in particular Valley Vision will be showing this repeatedly on our local television channels, and we'll all be enjoying that. So will a great many more people than those who were able to attend today. I really do want to thank the candidates for coming up. Not every candidate has been responsive in doing this, and both of these candidates have been enthusiastic and pleased at the process and the willingness to participate. And I'm going to make sure that I'm being heard on Valley Vision. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. I want to make a point of thanking sponsors for this. HEB Engineering, thank you. Consistent sponsor for Mount Washington Valley Economic Council events. The Northern New Hampshire Charitable Foundation is a sponsor of this event, as is Drive Brand Studio, the former Glenn Graphics, and thank them very much. And of course, it is the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council that sponsors this. They allow me, George Epstein, to be the moderator of this event, and I thank them for allowing me this privilege. And I want to especially thank both Jack Cuddy and Linda Fox Phillips for their efforts in making this event happen. With that, we will get started and have a lively and enjoyable discussion. I have had a coin flip that was witnessed by members of the press, so you know that it's got to be honest. They are not the mainstream media, as far as I can tell, and so you know that they are completely fair and unbalanced. Boy, I'm on a roll this morning. Let's see what I do actually answer questions. Yes, very Freudian, there's no question. As a result, on our opening remarks, Rich Ashooh will speak first and Frank Guinta second. And the closing remarks, Frank Guinta will speak first and Rich Ashooh second, which means essentially that Frank Guinta lost the coin flip, and I know he can overcome that. And finally, I just want to thank, again, all the people who are in attendance here, and for those of you who are watching on television and reporting this, and report this in the newspaper. We really do want a larger group in attendance and want to make sure we get the kind of publicity. The presidential election does sort of take all the air out of the room. It's hard to kind of get our attention focused on other races, but our congressional race, our Senate races, our gubernatorial races, these really matter. They matter for us right here in the Mount Washington Valley, and let's make sure that we are all here learning about the candidates and our choices. And in particular, we want to make sure the winner of this primary competition is going to come back here and participate in a debate between the end of the primary and the general election. So thanks to everyone, and please join us in the future. I'm going to start right in. We're going to have 1 minute to have opening statements. Linda Fox Phillips is going to be our timer right there in the middle. She's going to hold up a little sign with how many seconds are left. And we do have a 1 minute limit to the opening statements. Please feel free to applaud at the end of the opening statements and the end of the closing statements, but not any other time. You're not allowed to applaud because we want to hear as much as we can from the candidate. So let's start with the opening statements with Rich Ashooh. And by the way, I will not be referring to these gentlemen by their various titles that they have so much earned. I will simply refer to them by their full names, not to be disrespectful, but to make sure we're learning their names and getting to know them as much as possible. Rich Ashooh.
Thank you, George. And thank you, everyone, and Jack for hosting. And it's a pleasure to be here. It's great to hear George say that the district, the representation matters to this area. Well, this area matters to me. My mother, when I was 10, used to drag me around to volunteer for political campaigns, and something must have rubbed off. Not that I ever saw myself running for something But after marrying my wife, having 5 kids, and really spending a life trying to make New Hampshire and the country a better place, I realized I can contribute by running, by bringing the experience that I've had more than 20 years in the manufacturing sector to the table. And we've got lots of problems that need solving, and I'm running quite plainly because I believe I can help solve them. And that's what we do in New Hampshire. We try to solve problems. So that's why I'm running. This is such an important part of it to me, and I'm so very grateful to be with you and look forward to the morning.
Thank you. Frank Guinta.
Well, good morning. Thank you, George. Thanks to Jack Cuddy and the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council for hosting us this morning. It's great to be back in North Conway. I come here often because I think it's important for me as your representative to Washington to listen to you, to find out what is always on your mind so I can best reflect the views and values of the entire district. I continue to look forward to working with each and every one of you on important issues nationally as well as locally. I think being a member of Congress is about listening to what you have to say and delivering on things that are important, not just on a national level, but on a local level. So these forums, I think, are important to make sure that we are communicating the things that we're focusing on. There are large challenges that the nation has, and I look forward to continue to working to solve those problems, and look forward to this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I always prefer to focus solely on the issues that face the district, but I'm going to take just a couple of minutes here at the beginning and ask the candidates to talk a little bit about their personal situations and some of the more less fun questions for me to ask. I'm going to start with Rich Ashooh. Rich, you are a longtime lobbyist for BAE Systems, a large defense contractor owned by a British company at this point. Is this the time and is this the era in our country for lobbyists to be representing us in Congress? How does the voter feel comfortable that you're the person who's going to be advocating for all of us, not for particular interests?
So I am going to be advocating for particular interests, the interests of New Hampshire. I believe that's exactly what we need. But give me a moment, and in fact, thank you for the minute to talk about the work that I did in industry. When I started at the company more than 20 years ago, it was known as Sanders, and at that time was the world leader in what's known as electronic warfare. Those are the systems that keep our warfighters safe and our allies safe. And 20 plus years later, that company went from a $700 million corporation to a $5 billion corporation and New Hampshire's largest manufacturer. And along the way, not only did we continue to keep our warfighters safe and win multiple conflicts, we created thousands of jobs. I can't really think of any better experience for a member of Congress. Keeping us safe, creating jobs, that's exactly what I'll do as a member of Congress.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, when you were last here, you talked about the end of and the lack of any further investigation into your campaign finance issues and indicated that stuff was over and done with. In fact, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, ruled against you and determined that you had to pay back $350,000 to a bank account that your family had control of, and that you were fined $15,000. And now there are additional allegations about that same account and those same monies. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about that and explain why we should be comfortable with your actions in that regard?
Sure. This was a 6-year-old complaint that was resolved a year and a half ago. It was actually a settlement, and it is now resolved. And the FEC has since found us in full compliance. It's no shock to me that a couple weeks out, a month out from an election, that somebody tries to stir up this issue once again. But I think what's most important is this election is about the people that we represent, what people are struggling with, the challenges that families are going through. And we had 753 jobs in Carroll County that went unfilled last year. We have a U6 unemployment rate close to 10%. We've got, at the federal level, a debt and deficit that's spiraling, and we have an economy that's anemic. When I travel around the district, that's what people want to talk about and want those issues resolved, and that's where I will continue to focus on. Politics will take care of itself. But I think what I have demonstrated is the ability and the mission to focus on what people really want me to address, which is good public policy and issues that are going to help Carroll County and our state.
Thank you. Let's stay on it a little bit longer, Frank Guinta, and just talk about your general philosophy with regard to money and finance in politics, and the sense that I think an awful lot of Americans have that this is something of a corrupt industry. Not that either of you are corrupt people, but that this is a corrupt industry, one that is so dominated by money that we are not getting representatives who are, in fact, representing the best interests of all the people.
Well, I think there's a certain frustration here in New Hampshire, around the country, with the lack of action in Washington, the lack of focus and attention on the true issues that impact people. Money certainly has played a rather significant role in elections over the last several decades. But I think, as you saw during this last presidential campaign, particularly on the Republican side, we had started with 17 candidates, and the candidate that spent the least ended up being the nominee, because that person was speaking about the issues that I think most people really care about. So it's important for me to attend events like this and functions like this, travel the state when I come home every single weekend, to talk to the people that I represent. That is the most important job that I have, is representing the views and values of the people as I am in committee hearings and utilize the voting card that people have bestowed on me. So I focus on everything that I can do to help the people of our great state.
Thank you. Rich Ashooh, money in politics, was there anything you would do about it, and what are your concerns, if any, about it?
I do have concerns, coming from someone, I've not been elected before, and you know, the founders envisioned a system where, you know, I consider the kind of the John Stark rule. You know, he's the farmer soldier from Manchester who would go in and out of public service, and I think that's what they envisioned. Very hard to do that. It's hard to do that largely because the powers of incumbency, that is where we need to take something.
That is not an omen of anything. I'm going to put this in front here, and
I feel like I'm at a seance. Just kind of wounded spirits. Powers of incumbency are what need addressing in my view, because once you're in, then the system is built to keep you in. Taxpayer funding of mailing, taxpayer funding of travel. You know, these are the things that's hard for average citizens to overcome. And as a member of Congress, it's something I would tackle. I know it's self-defeating, but I'm not in it to be a career politician. And I think that it's going to help the system overall if we do that.
Rich Ashooh, what is the role of the Congress in foreign policy and in the management oversight of our military? And in particular, is there a failure on the part of the Congress to declare war when we are in fact fighting wars?
There is a failure in Congress because Congress seems powerless to do anything about this current administration. I happen to believe that the current president is the most ill-suited to be commander-in-chief that we've had in more than a generation. And as a result, we have a degrading national security situation. We have allies who do not trust us, and enemies and adversaries who are emboldened. Those are not accidents. That's a result of failed leadership by this administration. Well, when that happens, and it does happen, you need a Congress that should be able to stand up and deal with that, and with the many powers that Congress has. We don't have that right now. We've seen an emboldened Iran, a nuclear deal with Iran that is disastrous and will have generational complications. They're still the largest state sponsor of terror, and we are being run over by them. We need a Congress, and having spent more than 20 years in national security, that's leadership that I will bring to the Congress that's missing now.
And Frank Guinta, would you comment on the role of the Congress, and in particular, that responsibility to declare war? Shouldn't we declare war when we're fighting wars? Isn't that what the Constitution says?
Well, we have an obligation in the legislative branch to properly fund our warriors, to provide oversight through the appropriations process, authorization process. And yes, we should distinctly identify and state that we are at war with our adversaries. We're currently operating under an AUMF going back to 2001. I think that there should be an authorization of use of military force against ISIS. That has not occurred. The President is utilizing the pre-existing AUMF. But the reality is this President is not capable of leading in a way that I think most Americans want. Look, he drew a line in the sand with Syria, allowed them to step over. The Congress has required him to propose what his specific plan is. He signed that into law. He's refused to do it. We voted in the House against the Iran deal. The Senate never even took it up. So we are taking the actions necessary in the House of Representatives to hold him accountable.
Staying on that topic, Frank, the number of members, Republican members of the Senate, wrote a letter to the Ayatollah in Iran, essentially undermining the efforts for the president to negotiate the Iran nuclear deal, saying, beware, because we're not going to approve this, and the next president, if Republican, will not support this, et cetera. Was that an appropriate role for the Congress to play broadly? And if not, how does the Congress influence stuff like the negotiation of an Iran nuclear deal?
Well, you're correct in that that was the Senate, it was not the House of Representatives. I opposed the Iran deal. I was emphatic about that when the negotiations were occurring. I met with Secretary Kerry at the time to review what was in that agreement. And my feeling is that it was a failure to do anything to keep nuclear capability out of the hands of Iran. It also paid them $150 billion, which I thought was a significant problem. And now we're seeing Iran continually break and violate this agreement. Now, in the House of Representatives, what did we do? We voted to disapprove of the deal. I voted to disapprove this deal. The Senate never took it up. That was a disappointment to me. But I don't think this is a good agreement for the United States, and I think it puts us in greater jeopardy, not in a stronger position internationally. And I hope the next president eliminates it and treats Iran for what it is, which is a host to terrorist activity in this nation.
Do you think the Senate should be writing letters to our adversaries?
I think it's up to the Senate, but they were certainly frustrated with what the president was doing. He was negotiating with Iran, who was harboring terrorists and terrorist activity.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh, same set of questions.
Well, I believe in tactics that work, and I think that the letter was not destined to work. There is no greater power that Congress has than the power of the purse, and it has not been used effectively in this case. I believe that we can all recall areas in the past, in history, when Congress has stood up to presidents and forced change. We have not seen that since President Obama took office, and that is despite having Republican majorities in both the House and the Senate. So clearly something needs to change. The tools are there. It comes down to the leadership to use them.
Is it fair to say the tools are there? The power of the purse permits you to stop a president from doing stuff. It's much harder to make a president do something with the power of the purse. What do you do if you want the president to act? You can stop him, but can you make him act?
Well, I think, George, what you're getting to is the fact that there's such utter complete distrust between the two branches right now. Because it isn't a binary relationship. You don't sit down and say to the president, this is where you're going to stop. The fact of the matter is, on many issues, when you talk about influencing things, it's rarely going to be one tool. It's going to be a set of tools, and it's going to get down to the things that both sides care about. One thing I'm hearing about so much on the campaign trail, Americans are asking all the time, New Hampshire voters are asking all the time, when are we going to break the gridlock? Nothing is getting done. It's not just on national security. Nothing is getting done. We haven't had a balanced budget in more than 20 years. We haven't dealt with taxes, over-regulation. There's so many issues where we have not seen progress. So the utter breakdown between the branches would need to get fixed before you can really make progress.
And Frank, to let you respond to that question as well, is and you're serving in the Congress now, is there a sense of frustration? Do you have a tactic that you think needs to be used to make a president act in a way you don't feel he's acting?
Yeah, there is a sense of frustration. We feel it, I feel it, and I think most Americans feel it. The president signed into law, and it was a requirement that we made in the House of Representatives, that the president proposed to us in writing what his plan was to defeat ISIS. He signed that into law, and then he refused. He then negotiated an Iran deal that was largely opposed by the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, and most of the people in this country. Yet he went forward with it anyway. The leadership problem is with this president and taking this country in a direction that is counter to what I think good public policy stands for. And I have stood very strongly for the New Hampshire position, and I think the House position, that the president never should have entered into that agreement, and that he has to provide us what his plan is to eliminate and defeat ISIS. And remember, this president is a person who called ISIS the JV team. And look at what they're doing. They're now not just attacking in their region in Europe, but the United States. So we need bold leadership from the executive branch. The House of Representatives is willing to support that. He has not demonstrated it.
One more minute on this topic, and specifically on ISIS. What specific actions would you encourage any president, or the president, and the forthcoming president, to take against ISIS?
Well, I think you have to have a bold position after you meet with the generals on the ground and get a sense of what the best tactic is to eliminate and eradicate not just ISIS and cells here in America, but around the world. So you're going to have to listen to the military personnel, but what it's going to require is additional resources here in the U.S. to focus on identifying and eliminating those cells. The FBI said they don't have the resources to do it. Secondly, you're going to have a specific bold plan put forward by the president, and should that occur, the House of Representatives would likely fund it, but you've got to take a look at what that plan is. But third, you've got to work with our allies in the region and anticipate a real and true commitment from allies around the world and in the region to dedicate resources to eliminating this threat. The threat continues to grow and expand because there is not a unified front. That does need to start with the President of the United States, and that I think is the fundamental problem. This President has been weak in this area.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh, same question. What would you do about ISIS?
So this would have to occur under a new president because clearly the one we have, we need to undo the wrong things that have been done. But first we have to start with our troops. Everything gets down to them, not only equipping and resourcing them properly because they have been devastated by spending cuts that have hollowed out key elements of our force structure. But also on the morale side. I mean, the big part of the problem with Hillary Clinton's email is that she seems to have been treated by a different standard than anyone serving in our security services would have been, and that's devastating to the morale. We need to restore the faith of our allies. They feel abandoned, and we can't do this alone. And there's many steps to take in doing that. And thirdly, we need tactically to create breathing room for those who would be our allies in these regions. We need to support on the ground the people who are fighting those we oppose. We haven't effectively done that.
Thank you. Let's come home for a minute and talk about Medicare and Social Security. In broad terms, Guinta-Ashooh, the benefits from Medicare and the costs associated with Medicare, and the same is true for Social Security, can't continue as they are. They have to change. And as an old math teacher, I believe pretty strongly that if you're going to balance the budget and be able to continue to pay for Medicare and for Social Security, you either have to reduce benefits or you have to increase the taxes that support it. It's the only way to make the arithmetic come out right. What would you do to ensure the continued viability of Medicare and Social Security?
Well, there is a third option. The third option is to reform these programs. The two options George referred to, and that math is real, let's all agree. Left to their own, left on their current path, entitlements is what we're talking about. Entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they're unsustainable. So we have to take action. The longer we wait, the harder it is. But I don't believe that we that we can leave the programs structurally the way they are and expect them to continue. So the challenge for us is to preserve the goal, but deliver it in a way that makes sense to future generations. And I believe we can do that. It's longer than a minute to do it, but you could actually look at my website and I have recommendations for how we implement entitlement reform. This was an issue for me when I was working for Senator Rudman 30 years ago. We saw the alarm bells then. The situation has not improved. The longer we wait, the harder it is.
Well, let's give it another minute, Rich, and talk about some of the specific steps that would result in the ongoing sustainability of those two programs.
Yeah, so let's talk about Social Security because that's probably the most imminent. In the case of Social Security, it was built on a system where current workers paid for current beneficiaries, and at that time, when the program was created, you had more than 20 workers paying for one beneficiary. It's now 2 to 1. So we have to reform the program. And I believe there are people who want us to reform. I think the next generation would support a program that rewards and incentivizes longevity in the workforce, that rewards and incentivizes taking some personal ownership over your investment in Social Security. These are things that if we did would make the program far more robust and make more sense to the generations that are going to receive it. But let me make very clear, you don't implement any of these reforms in a way that would impact current or near retirement beneficiaries.
Thank you. Frank, give me take 2 minutes and talk in as much detail as you possibly can. How are you going to make this stuff work?
So without doing anything, these programs are insolvent within the next 20 years. Medicare is a little bit different than Social Security in terms of the solution. In my first term, I was serving on the Budget Committee, and we tackled this issue. Most people actually don't want to talk about Medicare and Social Security because they think it's the third rail of politics. I completely disagree. I think we've got to communicate and inform people what's on the horizon if we do not act. This is part of the obligation and responsibility of serving. So on Medicare, we came up with a proposal that was identified specific premium support to each individual. They would know what that number is. If you had a higher rate of income, you might not have the same level of premium support, but the notion of ensuring that everybody would receive Medicare at their age of retirement would be sustainable under that program. And guess what happened? Democrats at the time in this country, if you remember the TV ad with a guy that looked like Paul Ryan, shoving Granny off of a cliff in a wheelchair, they tried to scare Americans into winning that election. We were coming up with real solutions. So I am dedicated to working with both sides of the aisle in finding what that proper solution is, but that has to happen sooner rather than later. Because if you don't, it then becomes insolvent and you can't provide, you then can't provide the benefit. And let me talk about Social Security. Again, same thing. Most people don't want to talk about Social Security because they think it'll hurt them. I think it's a very different approach. We've got to inform people that in 20 years, if we don't do something, it will be a 25% reduction for everybody. And nobody wants to see that. So first, you've got to say you want to preserve and protect Social Security. Secondly, and I support preserving and protecting Social Security. Secondly, for any retiree or someone who is near retirement, you do not change the benefit. They have relied on that benefit for their retirement, and you do not change it. For future recipients, people who are in the workforce and are going to be in the workforce for a long time to come before they retire, you look at alternatives to modify the program and make it sustainable long term. That is a responsible and reasonable and viable financially way of addressing the issue. And I suspect that in the next Congress with the next president, this will get done.
Thank you. And you went over a little bit. If you wouldn't mind taking 30 more seconds on the Social Security side, you are, so to summarize, on the Medicare side, you are talking about higher income individuals contributing more towards the cost of their medical coverage.
Yeah, I think you have to look at that possibility. If you are in a higher bracket, that the premium support you would receive would not be the same as someone in a lower bracket.
Okay, and in terms of Social Security, you're talking about younger individuals having some change to their either level of benefit or their their tax rate.
Maybe their age of retirement. I mean, again, we're talking about somebody whose life expectancy is significantly longer than when Social Security was first put in place. Secondly, somebody who is currently in the workforce and doesn't plan on retiring for maybe 30 years. So you give them an idea of 30 years out what their retirement portfolio under Social Security would look like. Remember, we also have different retirement options today for investment, private investment, that people didn't have 40, 50 years ago. So that has to be part of the discussion. And I think that we can find a resolution. You know, look, we may continue in divided government in Washington, D.C. for the next decade. And if that is the case, you've got to bring ideas to the table that are going to bring Republicans and Democrats to an agreement that is sustainable, that preserves and protects Social Security for existing seniors, and makes the program sustainable for future recipients.
And I'm going to get to Rich in just a second, but really 30 seconds. Aren't you terrified that Democrats will interpret what you just said as privatizing Social Security?
Yeah, I'm not, and I'll tell you why. Because people deserve to know where you stand on the issues. I understand that, you know, our friends on the other side of the aisle will try to say that Republicans simply want to privatize. That's what they tried, 4 or 6 years ago. Scaring seniors is not the solution. And I think most seniors understand that what positions the other side of the aisle takes is nothing more than trying to scare seniors. What we need are real ideas on the table that are going to produce results for existing seniors and for future retirees.
Thank you. And Rich Ashooh, if you would take approximately 2 minutes, I'm doing this in my head, to try and make sure we balance this out. Talk in some detail, perhaps about those specific suggestions about investment alternatives for individuals managing their own retirement, the issues associated with premium levels for higher income individuals for Medicare, or other approaches that you would specifically take.
Sure. So in the case of Social Security, I think it's going to be very important to endow people with choice, with freedom. Over, one of the reasons why people are so angry and frustrated is they're feeling their choices being taken away. On healthcare, we're seeing it. On student loans, we're seeing it. When you pay your taxes, people feel frustrated by the fact that they really don't know, understand the system that they're a part of. And I'd like to not make that mistake with Social Security. Social Security, what I could envision, is a plan that allows people to have a couple of options. One is a basic bare bones safety net plan that would approximate almost what we have today. But then another option that is bolder, that allows people to take ownership over what they do and incentivizes them for things that would actually not only provide greater benefits for them, but also more soundness to the system. And again, these are not requirements, they're incentives. I think Americans do far better when they're presented with choice and incentive, and I would structure a system around that. Medicare is more than just providing a benefit, a safety net. People need to appreciate that Medicare drives healthcare in this nation, and if we get Medicare right going forward, we're going to help the overall healthcare system in this nation. A big part of the problem with Medicare, again, on the incentive side, Medicare disincentivizes innovation, disincentivizes cost savings. It rather rewards what's in the rearview mirror. In the case of healthcare, that's not good for anybody. And we have people all over New Hampshire, medical device manufacturers. The first thing you do, you walk in and you find out that they can't get out of the starting gate because Medicare is the roadblock. If we change that, not only are we proving a benefit, a very important benefit, but we're also empowering the entire healthcare economy. And I think those are a lot of bold goals that we should be striving for.
Thank you. Let's go after healthcare in more detail, but in just a second. Rich Ashooh, what's your favorite donut? And I'm looking at you and I'm not seeing a lot of donuts.
The key is have 5 kids and get fewer donuts than there are people and let people fight over it. But I am a big fan of the glazed sticks. Right now. Yeah. Eat them without limit.
Very middle of the road. I appreciate that. Not radical in either direction. Frank, what's your favorite donut?
Well, I am more of a donut guy. I love vanilla cream
at Dunkin' Donuts, which the powder gets all over your mouth, and it embarrasses you a little bit because sometimes you don't grab it all off of your face, but they're pretty good in my book.
You can live with the shame of
I can.
Let's talk about healthcare then.
That was healthcare.
That was healthcare. Let's start and take personal responsibility. The United States spends 50 to 100% more than all the other developed countries in the world on healthcare. By no measure that I can find are we healthier than anybody else in the world. I guess I'd ask you to speak just in general terms about the control of costs associated with healthcare. The Affordable Care Act, oddly named or now typically referred to as Obamacare, primarily moved responsibility for who pays for healthcare around and changed who was responsible for the payment, but doesn't seem to have had much, if any, impact on the actual cost of healthcare. What do we do that will actually have an impact on healthcare? Specific legislation that you and the Congress would like to see.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging that. The true failure of Obamacare was not that it didn't deliver what it promised, which was higher quality care at lower cost. It's that it didn't tackle cost at all. It was a government takeover of insurance, and there's a difference between insurance and cost. And that is where we need to start as policymakers. We have not properly addressed at all the idea of how you incentivize cost reduction in our healthcare economy. I spent most of the last decade on the board of a hospital in Manchester, Catholic Medical Center, and providers, individuals, we're all struggling with the same changing dynamic. It's impossible to get on to this solution. I have the feeling I'm going to need more than the time you give me to talk about it. But thank you. I would love to do that. So what are some foundational things that we can do to return the power over the most personal thing, our healthcare, back to individuals? We feel like we've lost it. Anybody who's had to have an argument with an insurance company over what's medically necessary knows the frustration that I'm talking about. That conversation should never occur. So how do you empower individuals? One, transparency. Just knowing what things cost and where you can get them is almost accidental in the current system we have. The system doesn't reward or incentivize that. Second, choice. Not only on insurance, but on providers. It's very hard to know. Look at what we're going through with the EpiPen and how hard it is to drive competition into the system. Americans are suffering as a result. So we absolutely need to address that. Finally, we don't incentivize innovation. We back to my Medicare example, the big driver of health costs in this nation ultimately comes down to Medicare, and Medicare does not incentivize innovation. If it did, we'd all benefit.
Thank you. Frank, get the 2 minutes on healthcare, managing the costs, and particular pieces of legislation you think might make a difference.
So I did oppose the Affordable Care Act, and my voting record shows that I have voted probably over 50 times to repeal it. I don't think it's the solution for our nation because it's a government-centered, top-down approach that now, after 5 years, has cost us over $1 trillion, and with few exceptions, has raised the cost of your premium and has increased the cost to both employers and employees. I'm sure you can find a circumstance where maybe that's not the case, but the vast majority of people that I talk to, businesses that I talk to, they see an increase in their cost. Here now in New Hampshire, the exchanges, not everybody has access to the exchange. And for example, the exchange that Minuteman runs, they just increased their premium 42% this summer. So for an average family of 4, they said it was going to be over $1,200 a month for to be on Obamacare. That is a fundamental problem, is that Washington felt that they could fix health care. What you need is a very, very different approach. Here's what I did when I was mayor of Manchester, our state's largest city. I didn't legislate. I worked with the 17 unions, city employees, and said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to provide to your PPO the cost, the actual cost for the top 20 procedures. And you can, as an employee or your family, can choose either the most expensive provider or the least expensive. And depending on where you are on that scale, the city, the employer, and the employee will split the savings. Guess what happened? We started to see healthcare costs declining because we empowered individuals to take over their healthcare. They were being proactive, we were more transparent. That is the start of what I think is a great opportunity to drive down costs and bring more competition back into the state.
Thank you. So, assuming that is a good model, having patients participate in the decision-making about the costs, and that is what creates competition and conceivably will drive down costs, would you be supportive of ending the restriction on Medicare to be able to negotiate the rates of drugs? We built right into our law the inability of Medicare to negotiate for the best possible rates, and when you have the largest payer in healthcare who can't do that, then you get these wildly inflated, or at least extremely high costs associated with drugs.
Yeah, that does need to happen. We need to be able to negotiate for those particular rates, number one. Number two, we need to be able to bring competition back into the state. When then Governor Shaheen changed our state to a community rating system, you saw competition was driven out of the state almost immediately. We're now essentially down to 2 and possibly 1 large carrier in the state of New Hampshire. That gives virtually nobody any choice and option. I had to deal with that when I was negotiating as mayor of our state's largest city. I mean, it was a significant portion of our budget, of our $300 million budget, and not having that choice was problematic. So we look for alternative health savings accounts, the transparency that I talked about, providing our employees the opportunity to have more engagement. But in addition to that, we have to be proactive about our health care. And in some circumstances, Medicare does not do that. They may not pay for a test that would identify a medical condition, but they will pay for, once that occurs, they'll pay for the after. Well, that's part of the problem. We need to be far more proactive and transparent in the process. That's not happening in the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh, same question with regard to your support for eliminating the restriction on Medicare negotiating best possible drug rates and any other specific triggers that would lead to better and greater competition.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that makes the point I've been trying to make today, which is that Medicare is more than just providing a benefit. They set the market, and we don't really look at it that way, and we need to, because it will drive tremendous changes. You know, again, on medical devices, they have a backward-looking approach, and we need to break that down. You know, take innovation, right? So this great company in Manchester that makes prosthetics, advanced prosthetics. Well, an advanced prosthetic is going to cost a little bit more up front, but save much more money over the long term. It's going to be far better for the patient. You'll get into the workforce sooner. You'll be happier. There's so many more benefits from it, and right now, that's not what happens. And so many benefits would accrue from just that one change. So that's one. I mean, certainly drug prices, but we need a fundamental look at how Medicare does things and change it. It would benefit us all.
Thank you.
George, can we stay on this for a minute, if that's okay?
Okay, let's give you each another minute. Go ahead.
This is an important issue for New Hampshire because we don't have the choice that we used to have. Let me just give you an example. 5 years ago, we had 82 different medical device companies in the state of New Hampshire. We're now around 30, 5 years later. The medical device tax in the Affordable Care Act was devastating to the industry here in the state of New Hampshire. And now what that does is it costs you as a consumer more money for that same device. That is the federal government trying to pay for the Affordable Care Act. The second component was the Cadillac tax. I'm not sure how many people are aware of the Cadillac tax, a 40% tax in the Affordable Care Act. If you're a single individual and you're at, I think it was 15.5 or a family 27.5, which is 80% or more of the policies, the federal government was going to charge you 40%. I filed the legislation to repeal that, and I actually got the president to agree. I actually got the president of the United States to agree with me, and we have now a 2-year delay. That would have impacted communities, public employers, private employers, as well as retirees. But again, the government solution is not going to be the best approach here, and I think the Affordable Care Act is showing that.
let me push back on the Cadillac tax one. The reason that the Cadillac tax was put in place and the government thought it would be a good idea to discourage Cadillac plans was exactly the reason you pointed out earlier, which is that it kept the patient from having skin in the game. With Cadillac plans that covered 100% of everything that some, for example, public employees did have, they had no motivation to try to control costs and to manage costs. So that was why that was discouraged. Why is it a good idea to allow Cadillac?
Well, I don't think taxing a plan and discouraging you to have a lower insurance program that might cover less things is the way to incent people to get healthy. I think the way you incent people to get healthy is to provide that competition, number one. Number two, provide that transparency and be proactive about wellness as opposed to helping someone after they are sick. Let's try to promote wellness opportunities. Those are the things that I did when I was mayor of Manchester, and you started to see the city employees get healthier as opposed to the cost of health care going up because we were dealing with them after a medical incident. If you promote wellness and wellness programs, you can actually have a healthier individual, healthier lifestyle. And let me say, in the state of New Hampshire, we don't have an income or sales tax, we have a property tax. So guess what? If a municipality's increased cost because of the Cadillac tax was going to occur, like it was for Manchester, for example, that was $5 million, 2.5% on the tax rate. So now the residents of that community are paying for that increase. That would have happened to communities all throughout the 1st Congressional District.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh, 2 more minutes to sort of go where you want with regard to health care, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on the Cadillac tax as well.
Well, this is why you.
I'm sorry. Everybody knows the Cadillac tax was a tax on plans that pay very expensive plans and then plans that pay for virtually all of your medical care without significant deductibles or anything else.
Right, and if you're a candidate, you learn from a lot of policemen and firemen and people who have these large municipal contracts that they have what are considered Cadillac plans, and so they're very upset about the Cadillac tax and want to see it repealed. I want to see Obamacare repealed. Let's use our tax code as an example. So you have this government overwrought, torturous tax system that we have, and what do people not like about it, other than the fact that it takes money from them? It's that you don't feel like you're getting well treated unless you get some sort of an exemption or a benefit, and there is a lobbying industry built around getting those kinds of special treatment in the tax code. As bad as that is, and I want to see it get away, and I'm sure we'll talk about taxes soon enough, it would be devastating and horrific for a healthcare system to operate the same way. But that's what's going on right now. You've got constituencies trying to seek exemptions from the healthcare system that we have via Obamacare. So, yes, do I sympathize for the people who want to have an exemption on Cadillac plans? Sure, but we need to take apart the whole system, or else we're going to be looking at a healthcare system that approximates our tax code that we do not.
Thank you. Frank, Guinta, if you were looking to get some exercise and you had a choice between kayaking, water skiing, or just swimming, which would you do?
Water skiing.
You can still do that.
Yeah, I can.
That's pretty impressive. Donuts at all?
Just talked my daughter Colby, who's 13, about 3 weeks ago, to ski. She skied for the first time.
That's great. That's great. Guinta-Ashooh?
So I met my wife on the crew team at UNH. She was the coxswain. I was a rower. So the answer is, since you didn't give me the option, I could take the kayak, break the oar in two, and try to row it backwards.
Wow, a couple of jocks here. I like that. Okay. Very good. More than overcome whatever donut problem.
More than
What's your favorite donut, George? We stumped the
Not at
moderator.
all. Not even a little bit. Go to Levitt's Bakery, right up the street here, down the street here, and get the apple fritter.
Okay.
It's not technically a donut, perhaps, but it is an experience. It's an experience. Free advertising. I expect a free fritter. Kickbacks from the monitor. Seems perfectly appropriate to me. With regard to money, taxes. Let's talk about taxes a little bit. No one in their right mind would think that what we have is a good tax code. Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Communists, no one would think this was a good idea. What would you do if you had your way, and what would the net impact be in terms of the total taxes raised as a result of a tax change, a tax plan you would have?
So I have a fairly bold plan on this, and I think that's what we need. I'm a supporter of a flat tax. And I was recently endorsed by Steve Forbes, who's considered to be the father of the flat tax. And the fact of the matter is, you know, the way we raise revenue in this nation is unfair, it's torturous, and it's mysterious. And I think Americans are far better empowered with knowledge. And right now we have a completely opaque system that is inherently unfair and creates an industry, as I just spoke about, of trying to game that system. With a flat tax, you take all that away. And leaving any vestige of the system we have now only still lends itself to the abuse and unfairness that we're all aware of. I think we need a bold plan on this, so I support a flat tax. I think we also need to address corporate taxes, because we're not going to turn this economy around unless we have a more competitive tax code at the corporate level, which is now 35%, which is the highest in the civilized world. Of course jobs are fleeing overseas. We need to address that as well. As far as the revenue question, I believe it's a dynamic answer. And it's not an answer where you're going to implement a tax code and then have the revenue impacts immediately. I think what I'm talking about is going to grow the economy in a way that's going to produce far better results than we have today.
Thank you. Frank, get the taxes.
Well, I certainly support an overhaul of the tax code. Look, the IRS is too big, it's too expansive, it's in our daily lives, and it doesn't need to be. We need to simplify the tax code for individuals. It should be a flatter, fairer system. We're looking at various options, from either a flat tax to going from 7 rates down to 3, which is probably the plan that's going to come forward should Mr. Trump be the next president. But regardless, the House is going to move forward with a plan in that area. That will simplify things. That'll make it easier. You should be able to file your taxes, on a postcard. On the business side, we are at 35%. We're not competitive internationally. We have companies leaving or inversions as a result of that, performing inversions as a result of that. You need to bring that down to about 15%, which is far more competitive internationally. Then you would see those resources come back, not just to the Treasury, but you would see investment here in R&D and growth for the economy in the United States. And finally, $2 trillion is spent on regulation. You've got to address the regulatory issues that this president has instituted through his executive orders and administrative actions.
Thank you. Staying on the topic a little bit further, or actually let's expand it into balancing the budget. We're at $19 trillion. The interest on the national debt is the fastest growing piece of our budget, over $200 billion now. And the reason it's that cheap is because interest rates are so incredibly low. If interest rates went up a couple of points, we would really be in big trouble. How long do we have to get our budget under control and get it balanced, and how are you going to do it? And I'm back to arithmetic again. Raise taxes or cut spending, and how much spending can you realistically cut?
Well, look, I voted against this last budget because it added $50 billion in new spending. It didn't address some of the policy issues that were being funded that the president supported. So I stood up against my own leadership and voted against it. And I then voted against the omnibus because it was a $1.1 trillion spending bill that didn't balance the budget. So after that, George, I was asked to be on the budget committee because I stood up. It wasn't a go along, get along kind of situation. Speaker Ryan came and said, Frank, you were mayor, you were on the budget committee in the past, I want you back, I want you to find solutions. So I found $60 billion in cuts, $10 billion more than the existing increase. Required a balanced budget amendment. And one thing I think we need to do is audit every single agency, including Department of Defense, find the waste, fraud, and abuse, like the $140 million that was spent in bonuses in the VA, and put that money toward reduction of our debt. You can balance this budget. You can do it fairly quickly. There just hasn't been the political resolve to do it, and that's part of the challenge. So, when you want an independent-minded individual who's going to focus not just on working with the other side of the aisle, but when your own leadership says they're going in the wrong direction, that's me. I had to balance budgets as a mayor. I had to balance budgets in business. We all have to do it in our communities. There's no reason Washington shouldn't be doing it either.
Frank, let's stay there for one more minute. We're at 430 billion or so in deficit. It's come down to 430 billion. Now it's starting to climb again because of stuff built in and rate increases that are built into the budget. $430 billion. What do you cut? You talked about 50 billion. What do you cut? And then what do you raise in terms of tax?
Sure. So I wouldn't raise taxes. Let me start with that. I think you can reform the code, simplify the code, that's going to create an environment of economic growth, and that will increase revenue. That, with reducing the regulatory burden that many people and businesses feel around the state, number one. Number two, to get that, first you got to balance the budget before you start reducing the long-term deficit, long-term debt, excuse me. So about 430, 450 billion, depending on the day of the week. One of the pieces of legislation I filed is for every piece of legislation that spends money that goes to the floor, there should be a review first to see if it's duplicative or if there's an existing program that already addresses that particular issue. If so, that agency should come before a committee of jurisdiction, justify the need, but it requires Congress and the House of Representatives and the United States Senate to perform greater oversight duties, which it's not doing right now. That's one of the fundamental problems of how your money is being spent. That irks me as a citizen, and it should irk you as well. And that's why you need somebody who's going to get in there and do the things that need to get done in order to balance that budget in short order.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh, what are you going to cut? What taxes are you going to raise in order to balance the budget, if you think it's important that we balance the budget?
The fact that we have not had a balanced budget in nearly 20 years is an utter failure. And should be intolerable to all of us as Americans. I'm going to date myself, but when I first graduated, and I had the honor to work for a senator named Warren Rudman. And at that time, he was deficit spending alarmist. We had chronic deficit spending at the time. And he led in the New Hampshire way, introduced legislation to address the deficit situation. At that time, the situation was one where we had $3 trillion of debt. And that was about 30% of our GDP. Now the debt is $19 trillion and 77% of our GDP. The problem is far worse now, yet we're doing less about it. So we do need new leadership on this. The fact of the matter is you need to do three large things with lots of details underneath. We talked about one of them already, tax reform. It's very hard to have long-term sustainable balanced budgets unless we improve the way we collect revenue and, again, grow Americans' confidence in it. Secondly, we need budget reform. When do people hear about the federal budget? It's always in October when there's been a breakdown and we're at a fiscal cliff. And of course Americans are cynical about this. We need to set the target at the beginning of the year and stick to it. And that needs to be done over several years, but Congress needs to stop thinking in 2-year increments and start thinking about this nation and the next generation. Finally, we already talked about it, but again, it has to be part of the solution, entitlement reform. You're not going to have long-term sustainable budgets without addressing entitlement reform. I know that's a lot. I believe Americans will walk over hot coals for their nation if they believe it's the right thing to do. We need to do that now. Lots to do, but I believe we can do it.
Thank you. Very specific yes/no questions, first two, and then how would you go about addressing it, if at all? Number one, do you believe, Guinta-Ashooh, that the planet is getting warmer? Number two, do you believe that human factors, human activity, are significantly contributing to the increase in temperatures, if you believe it's getting warmer? And number three, if you believe the first two things are true, what would you do about it as a congressman?
Anybody who's ever stood in the Mount Washington Valley knows, especially when you look around at all the glacials, right? This is an area that was covered by miles of ice. Of course the planet's gotten warmer. Does mankind contribute to that? I'm sure it does. But I don't believe the answer is to inhibit mankind's activity on this. What we need to do, the fact of the matter is, America has done its job very well. Greenhouse gases have been reduced or holding for the past 20 years. The problem exists in other nations which need to take better responsibility of this issue. What I would not do is support what the general election opponent in this race, Carol Shea Porter, supports, which is a carbon tax. Punishing the economy is not going to be the answer here. We need to continue the good stewardship that we've done and put pressure on other nations, which are really the problem.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, is the Earth getting warmer? Is human intervention contributing significantly to that? If so, what would you do about it?
Well, I think there's certainly some temperature change on a fairly regular basis. Whether there's a conclusion that the solution that the President, Carol Shea Porter, wants, which are higher taxes, more regulation, and less energy options, that's not the future where we need to go. Look, when I was a mayor, and I think it still stands today, I was the only mayor to put a green roof on a city hall. And by the way, we didn't even do it with taxpayer money. We focused on conservation while I was mayor, and I think that is a reasonable and responsible approach to reducing the cost of energy in this country. But the notion that we are going to tax our way out of this problem is not the solution. And I do think other nations like China need to live up to their obligations in terms of the pollution that they are providing into the nation, into the atmosphere.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, what's the role of the federal government in education? And in particular, we have concerns as a country with regard to how we measure up against other nations around the world, particularly in K through 12 education. We certainly appear to have slipped backwards there. If the federal government has no role, then how do we as a nation act to improve our position with the rest of the world? And if the federal government does have a role, what would it be?
Well, Morgan and I have two young kids. They're 13 and 11. Colby's in 8th grade, and Jack is in 6th. He had his first day of school this morning. I don't wake up every morning asking the federal government to improve their educational opportunities. What I do as a parent is fight for local control, because I think local leaders and community leaders are far better at designing programs for their communities. Look, we have 99,000 school districts in the nation. Why would we ever treat them all the same? We don't treat school districts in New Hampshire the same. Yet the federal government would have us believe that they know better with the $80 billion that is sent to them every year on how to educate kids. Well, what they do is they take a portion of it for administrative costs. They return a portion of it back to the states with a whole host of mandates and requirements. That's taking the teacher out of the classroom. I want to empower the teacher, empower the parent, and empower the principal and the administrator to provide a far more effective plan in the classroom, which also means school choice. It means charter school options. Every student should have the best available opportunity to get the best education, and the way to do that is to minimize Washington's role in this, not expand it.
Thank you. Rich Ashooh, education in the federal government.
Just generally speaking, there's a very, very, very short list of things the federal government is good at and should be doing. And education is on the long list of things it shouldn't be doing. The federal government shouldn't be controlling the student loan process. The fact of the matter is, we are crushing college kids now in debt. We have almost a culture of debt. It's being promoted by the federal government. That certainly needs to stop. But what we need to do is get government out of the way when it comes to education. As chairman of the Josiah Bartlett Center, which is a think tank here in New Hampshire, a conservative think tank, one of our major priorities is trying to drive choice in the system and empower parents to do the right thing as they saw fit for the kids. So what did? We promoted charter schools and we promoted choice, because those things are not available to all New Hampshire residents. They're available to people who can afford them, but I don't think that's how our system should be. We don't need the federal government to make that part of education better. We need to do it ourselves, and we did.
Rich, let's stay on that for just a second. Let's talk about federal role in student loans. The state of New Hampshire doesn't support higher education with very much money. We're certainly far away last in the country in terms of that support. And one of the ways that low-income New Hampshire kids have the opportunity to go off to school is because the federal government offers essentially subsidized loans to them. What would you replace that with?
I would replace it with things we're probably not even thinking about now. If you open up opportunities for innovation in college, not only college financing, but college affordability, let's keep in mind, we see examples, there tend to be the exceptions and not the rule, but examples of innovative ways to pay for college. Southern New Hampshire University does a magnificent job of making opportunities available and being quite competitive in that respect. We need a system that incentivizes those exceptions so that they're the rule. Right now, it's the other way around. We're being driven into one size fits all. I mean, I've got 5 kids. 3 are in college. And when those get out, there's going to be another 2 more coming in, and so I'm going to be living with this for a while. And let me tell you something. It is a powerless system. It is a powerless system. The government knows what you're paying in taxes, and they're the ones who control the financing, and you feel that your hands are tied. That is not the American way. The American way should be about innovation, choice, and quality, and we can drive that into how we pay for colleges and drive the cost of college down. That's probably another minute answer.
Well, I'm going to ask you to spend one more minute on that. You talk about the Southern New Hampshire University option, which is the vast majority of students are online students. We know that for-profit institutions did create many different options for people. We also know how poorly many of those worked out, how many students felt they were underserved, didn't learn what they needed to learn, and were left with debt and without a valuable degree. The model we have for higher education as a face-to-face delivery system, is it that a bad model, and should we be changing that model?
The model absolutely needs to evolve. But look, at the end of the day, what's education all about? I mean, for many of us, it's about being a productive citizen. And I think there are thousands and thousands of institutions of higher learning. They all shouldn't be the same. There should be a menu of options. So the one-size-fits-all does not apply here. But in the case of our public institutions, you want to make sure that they're relevant to the economy in which they're based. In New Hampshire, that means an economy that's driven by advanced manufacturing and other great things. And I think when you have that right, then the value proposition improves for everybody. Whether or not you have a child in the system, you will benefit from that, because now we're driving benefits to the overall economy. And we haven't fully connected that yet. In my past, George knows this, been very involved on the board of the university system and Franklin Pierce University, and that was always my goal, which was to drive relevance of the education into the economy, because again, we all benefit from that investment.
Thank you. Frank, Guinta, up to 2 minutes, and if you'd address in particular student loans and the role of the federal government, quite honestly, in regulating some of the higher education options that have arisen and haven't been so good.
So real quick, a couple of stats. In New Hampshire, while we have relatively low unemployment rate here, in Carroll, 753 jobs went unfilled. We also have an average, wage of roughly $12 per hour. You want to see economic growth, you want to see growth opportunity, you want to see more employment opportunity so people have upward mobility. And the U6 number is actually closer to 10%. So we're not seeing state growth or national growth at the 4 and 5% levels. So why is that important and relevant? Well, educational opportunities play a significant role in that. Here in the state of New Hampshire, as my wife and I look at what the options are for our children as they go into high school and beyond, we think about how to pay for this. College is extremely expensive and unaffordable to most Americans and most granite staters. So we've got to look at alternatives. So I think instead of the traditional seat time model in most high schools, we need flexibility, school district by school district, to implement alternatives. STEM and STEAM programs, for example, have been a fascinating opportunity for kids number one, to get kids back to school and engaged, rather than traditional seat time. And you're seeing now kids in 9th and 10th and 11th grade get access to companies, to businesses, to different technologies in and around their community as a result of STEM and STEAM programs. They should be able to get college credit for that. You should be able to test out of certain college courses. You should be able to go to college year-round instead of the traditional 2-semester, 4 years. So you can start to drive the cost of that college experience down. Finally, on student loans. This president took the private sector out of the student loan program. And as a result of that, you've seen the skyrocketing cost of student loans to families and students. You've got to allow the private sector to compete again and drive that cost down for that loan as well.
Thank you. I could keep these gentlemen here working hard for hours to come, but they both need to go water skiing, rowing, and eat donuts. So I am going to bring us to a halt. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to ask two topics you didn't hit on, drugs and transportation infrastructure, particularly the airport. I'd like to know what Chief Jones would do and
I think it would be great. Let's give them each a minute to comment on those two areas, and then we'll go into the closing statements and crank it up. I'm sorry, and for the purposes of the recording, there was a request to hear about positions on drugs, I assume the opioid crisis, and on transportation infrastructure.
You want me to do it one at a time, or?
Please.
Okay, let's start with heroin first. 439 people died last year in the state of New Hampshire. We went from 47th to 3rd in per capita deaths in about a year. This is affecting every community in New Hampshire. It's almost led to 50,000 deaths across the state, across the country. I'm chairman of the Congressional Task Force to combat heroin and opioid use. The last year of my life, I've dedicated to finding solutions to help those who are addicted. And thankfully, over the course of the last year, our committee, after hearings here in New Hampshire and Washington, made recommendations on what should be in the Carroll legislation that was recently passed. We made those recommendations. We were able to significantly increase that and change that legislation. And by the way, when people say nothing is getting done in Washington, this is an example where Republican leaders put a solution on the table. We got the president to agree with us. And now in treatment and recovery, we have new programs. We have new programs for veterans. We have new programs for women who are pregnant. And that is now starting this year, $192 million a year for the next 5 years as a direct result of the work that we've been able to accomplish in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Rich Ashooh, the drug problem that faces New Hampshire and the country.
This is a crisis, and it's high time we start treating it as one. More than a death a day has now been occurring for the past 2.5 years, and that should be unsettling and intolerable. But there's very few of us who have been touched by this. In my own personal case, through my service at Catholic Medical Center and in my community, we're experiencing it in very tough ways. So what should have been done, but still needs to be done, which is we need to take emergency measures that cut through the red tape that's keeping available resources now, resources that are available now, from being put on the problem in prevention, treatment, recovery, and law enforcement. We have emergency declarations for things like snowstorms and drought. We haven't taken the same measures in the case of this crisis, and people are dying as a result. We need to act right now to free up the dollars that are there, put them on the problem.
Thank you. Rich Ashooh, transportation infrastructure. Any thoughts with regard to that? And in particular, what's the role of the federal government, and what more, if anything, should the federal government be doing to help New Hampshire address all of the issues we have with our transportation infrastructure?
Yeah, this is, it's an important issue. It's tied to the economy. I believe it's a shared responsibility with the federal government and local government, with a strong deference towards the local government. All those dollars should be spent. In New Hampshire, we're seeing some smart investment that I think need to continue. But I also believe Some infrastructure, we think of roads, we think of bridges, but the fact of the matter is, we're not going to get anywhere in this region until we address energy costs. That is a part of the infrastructure as well. And right now, New Hampshire suffers under the highest costs in the nation. To drive our economy forward, we need to address all these things. And there is no plan to deal with energy. There is a state energy plan. It's good for a laugh. We need something more serious. Again, shared responsibility with the federal government, but that's an important responsibility.
Thank you. Frank Guinta, transportation infrastructure, and throw in a little energy if you'd like.
New Hampshire's a small state. For every dollar we send to Washington, D.C. relative to transportation, we get about 72 cents back. So I served on the Transportation Committee. It was incredibly important to change that formula so we could just return the resources that we sent to Washington. As a result of that, and I voted for the last transportation bill because of that, we changed the formula and increased the amount of money that New Hampshire received. That is actually incredibly important, particularly for the northern part of the state, and putting resources in the northern part of the state. I think the most important issue here, though, is eastern slopes. You have an opportunity, you have a gem. You have an opportunity to bring greater economic stability, economic growth, and employment growth if you upgrade eastern slopes. So I've been meeting with both Freiburg and Conway over the last 2 years. The community supports the growth and expansion of eastern slopes. So I worked with the Northern Border Commission, and we just announced, I don't know if you had heard about it yet, but we just announced about a month ago a $250,000 grant in order to start moving in that project. I think it's an incredibly important thing for the region. That primarily serves Conway, the North Conway area. You're going to see real growth as you expand that airport, and that's something I'll continue to work on.
Thank you. And I will now ask Frank Guinta to speak first, and you have a 1-minute closing statement, and I'm looking forward to a roar from the crowd at the end of that.
Well, thank you, George, very much, and thank you to the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council and Jack Cuddy for putting this on. Thank you all for coming. This is an important opportunity for us to talk about what's important, not just nationally, but locally. Look, I serve at your pleasure. I am your representative. It's important that you understand you have an impact on the things that I vote on, the committee hearings that I focus on, and how I can try to bring resources back to the state of New Hampshire and create an economic condition and opportunity for all parts of the district. So I take that constituent service obligation very seriously. Look, we've got serious and large national problems, but what you get from me is an independent-minded conservative who is going to be bold, who has the leadership, and who is tested, willing to work with both sides of the aisle, but to let people know when I think our leadership is going in the wrong direction, which is why I voted against the budget, against the omnibus, voted against the Puerto Rico bailout, voted against the debt ceiling increase. This is what I think New Hampshire wants from their representative, someone who is thoughtful, someone who gets things done, and I'd certainly enjoy and appreciate your support on September 13th and again in November. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Guinta-Ashooh.
Thank you, George. Good to be with you again, and Jack for hosting, and to all of you for being here. I truly enjoyed it. Love to stick around a little bit and talk to you more if we didn't address anything. Look, voters are angry and frustrated. This was an unusual year, I think, to many of us. But what we learned is that voters are tired of not seeing results. The problems that we've talked about today, and a few we haven't, like immigration and other things, they've been around for a long time, several years. And voters know it's time to start getting things done, because it's not enough to just talk about them. We need to balance this budget. Everything we say we want to be as a nation is not possible until we restore our fiscal house to order. National security is a degrading situation. Overregulation, the economy is struggling. There's so many issues. We can't wait anymore. I think coming from the private sector, where I've got different sets of experience that are relevant to the issues we have, is going to empower me to start delivering those results. But nothing's possible without your help. So I ask for your support so that we can do that. We get it right in September, we'll get it right in November, and then we'll start taking the country back. Thank you very much for being here and giving me some moments to talk to you.
Always, we have a gift that is actually pretty nice that we give our attendees, our speakers, our debaters. In this case, what's that?
It's a donut.
It's a donut. A fritter from Levitt Baker. In this case, there's a quid pro quo, and I'm looking for you to promise that if you are the winner of this primary, that you'll come back and join us for a general election debate sometime before November. Is that something we can promise? Then guaranteed. Here you go. You got Rich, very good. Frank, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. And your certificate, yes. Your certificate of appreciation from the Mount Washington Valley. Thank you all again, and thank you for watching on Valley Vision. Make it work hard.
Thanks for coming.
What's up, buddy?
Okay.
Then I will.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can't.
Do that, please.
I mean, I'm staying here.
Very well.
And where are you from?
I'm down for trackers.
Yeah, we usually dump that trackers in.
Okay.
That's normal. Want to do next? Oh, no, yeah. So why don't we do start with you? Yeah, we So, as a husband was in the investments. It's tough to work in response. Well, the case. Best to provide you budget. Right now. So I've got a great relationship with
I don't want to do that. I never had to go. No, I didn't want
What
to.
they do this time of year, I don't know. But that's the our contractors. I gotta think Right.
Yeah. Cut out the blunder of the sign falling down, because that was me trying to take that up.
You might want to tell them that.
I will become your best friend forever, and we'll never have any problems. Just cut it out. Just be like, oh damn, the kid. What?
Well, you might
I
want
need
to
to invest in better duct tape.
use.
Well, I didn't know we were allowed to tack on walls. I didn't bring them with me.